I'm sharing with you my personal experience living in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, and things you should think about when you get there if you're traveling to Playa del Carmen for the first time. So stay tuned and let's get started.
We could be everything, everything, anything that we see we could be. We could be anything that we want. You think if they said it, then they must mean it. So you should feel it, somehow you think that you need it. Others' opinions.
So you guys didn't know this, but I lived in Playa del Carmen, Mexico for 3 years. And I'm going to talk about my first 3 months being there, ever leaving the US. And I'm sharing this video because there's someone out there that needs to know what they're getting into before they arrive to the airport to go to Mexico. So let's dive in. Number one, the pesos. I think the biggest hurdle for me was learning the currency. So I was used to operating off of a US currency, but in Mexico, I had to operate off of the Mexican pesos. So it took me a while to adjust to the currency rates. So like at one point, a Mexican peso was 19 to 1. And in reality, that may sound like a lot, but I did learn that my pesos like ran through my fingers like crazy. One thing I think people need to do when they go to Mexico to really understand how the economy works so their money and their pesos could last a little longer is check out the price of milk here in the US and then check the price of milk in Mexico. Now, when you're checking the price of that milk or bread or food item, make sure you're doing it in a local area where the locals go to the grocery store, not the tourist sites. So that's probably a tip for you all. Shop with the locals if you don't want to spend a lot of money. So that was definitely a learning curve for me. The second thing that was a shock for me was not being able to boil pasta from the faucet water. All the water that I drank or cooked with in Mexico was bottled. So I had to learn in Spanish how to order water, or I had to carry 5 gallons of water like weekly for however much I needed for that week. So that is definitely something to be mindful of. I will tell you, I did brush my teeth with the faucet water, but I made sure not to drink it or swallow it. So, to each his own, but you cannot, the water is off limits in Mexico. You cannot drink it. Don't even try. You will get sick. You heard it here first. So, get used to buying bottled water, cooking your pasta in bottled water. The third thing that was a culture shock, but that I started to enjoy was the resourcefulness of the people. So, being in Mexico, you would go get juice and they would sell it in like a Deer Park water bottle, like the 16 ounces of water, and they would put the juice in these bottles. And I love the fact that just seeing how they recycle things was very common versus if someone were to do it here in the US, we first thing we would say is like, is this clean? How do I know this is safe to drink out of? But it's totally normal. It's totally clean in Mexico. But I loved how they're very like resourceful. They care about the environment, and I think they do recycle. I do like that. This one. This one is like a love and hate for me, but it was the transportation situation for me. So I had to take taxis. I refused to drive in Mexico because I just didn't want to ever have to get in a car accident. I never want to have to explain my side of the story to the police in Spanish when I don't know enough Spanish. So, transportation, getting used to taking buses and taxis and lots of walking. A lot of people, I call them expats, American expats, take the taxis. I personally love taking the bus because it was so cheap. The bus, it was 7 pesos or 9 pesos. So the transportation is tricky. Some people do have vehicles. I do not have expertise on how to get a driver's license and tags. You probably, have to figure that out. But the transportation was a shock. And I will say I do love how there was so much transportation that I could get wherever I wanted to go. So it was never something stopping me from getting to where I had to go. Now, this is a tip for people going to Playa del Carmen specifically. When I was there at times by myself and I had to order a taxi or I had my kids with me, I would always use WhatsApp Taxi, or I would order my taxi because they give you taxi numbers. And that was very important to me for my safety, because then I could share the taxi number with my family members or my friends if anything would ever happen. And it also helped if I lost something. It was easy to keep track of what taxi number I was in. So that is a little tip I want to give you guys. If you ever go to Cancun, Playa del Carmen, always try to order a taxi. To me, it's safer. Having an American diet, we know we get a lot of processed foods. But living in Mexico, it took me a while to get used to eating fresh. For example, when you go to the grocery store in Mexico and you go to the meat department, they have the chicken right there. It's so fresh. You take that said chicken home and you keep it in your refrigerator for 2 or 3 days, it's spoiled. The freshness of the food is top tier, one of my favorite things in Mexico. I love the fresh fruits and vegetables. I love the fresh juices. And I was actually a healthier person when living in Mexico. So it's not really of a shock. It's more of like I need to stay here because I'm becoming healthier because of the food. How fresh everything was, and I just loved how cheap it was. And I will tell you, I left Mexico and I went to Miami and tried to order food. And when I looked at the receipt, it was ridiculously high. And so there is this thing when you leave Mexico and come back to the US, it's this period of like adjusting because of a little culture shock. And I don't think it's culture shock, I think it's money shock. You're so used to living on less, it's hard coming to the US and having to spend more for something that you got for a fraction of the price. One of the things that was shocking to me, but this was like later on, I would say like towards my second and third year living in Mexico, was the amount of money that I could save shopping where the locals shop, eating what the locals eat, making friends with the locals so they'll tell you all the spots that they go to. And then your friends who are locals will tell you when you're overpaying for things. Like, remember what I said earlier, milk and stuff? They would tell you, that's too much. I know where I can get that cheaper, or they're overcharging you. So that was a very helpful in my stay in Mexico, was surrounding myself around people from Mexico so I could learn how much I should be paying for things and not feel taken advantage of. It also helps when you're taking like taxis and transportation, because you're getting the local's price when you're in a taxi with the local. And lastly, my favorite thing about living in Mexico is they are family-oriented people. When I tell you the support is real in Mexico, the support is real. There was a time I couldn't get in my home because the key wasn't working to the front door of my house. And when I tell you the entire community came out 10 o'clock at night, when they're on a work night, on a school night, to make sure that me and my children got into our home safely, top tier type of human I like to be around. So these are the things that were kind of a culture shock for me when I traveled to Mexico for the first time. Thank you guys for being here. Don't forget to like this video and make sure you subscribe to my channel. See you next time. Bye.
We could be everything.